When German medical officer Dr. Helena Richter was captured in Tunisia in May 1943, she expected harsh treatment, forced labor, perhaps even execution. What she discovered instead would challenge everything Nazi propaganda had taught her about American brutality. The Americans did something unthinkable. They shared their most precious medical resource, penicillin, with enemy prisoners. This is the documented story of how professional compassion transcended wartime hatred. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The capture of Axis forces in North Africa brought approximately 275,000 German and Italian soldiers into Allied custody. Among them were hundreds of medical professionals who would witness something unprecedented in modern warfare. Dr. Richter, a 32-year-old surgeon from Munich, had spent 3 years treating wounded soldiers in field hospitals across North Africa. She had witnessed unspeakable suffering, performed amputations without adequate anesthesia, and watched young men die from infections that proper medication could have prevented. The scarcity of medical supplies in the German military had been a constant nightmare. By 1943, even basic antibiotics were rationed so strictly that doctors had to choose which patients deserved treatment and which would be left to fate. Helena's journey to American custody began on a sweltering afternoon when Allied forces overran her field hospital near the Tunisian coast. She remembered the moment with crystalline clarity. The thunder of artillery growing closer, the panicked evacuation attempts, and finally, the arrival of American soldiers. She had stood in her blood-stained surgical gown, hands raised, expecting the worst. Instead, an American medical captain approached her, noticed her Red Cross armband, and addressed her in accented but respectful German. "Doctor, your patients need you. Will you help us stabilize them for transport?" That simple question, treating her as a colleague rather than an enemy, was her first glimpse of something extraordinary. The transport to America aboard a Liberty ship provided stark contrast to everything Helena had experienced. Instead of being herded into cargo holds like cattle, medical personnel were given actual passenger accommodations. 3 meals a day, substantial ones with fresh bread, vegetables, and meat, appeared with regularity that seemed almost miraculous to someone who had subsisted on field rations for years. She shared a cabin with 2 other German nurses, and together they marveled at the abundance. "Where does all this food come from?" one whispered in the darkness of their first night at sea. Helena had no answer, but she was beginning to understand that American resources exceeded anything German propaganda had suggested. The Atlantic crossing took 2 weeks, during which Helena had time to reflect on her situation and observe her captors. American medical personnel aboard the ship treated German medical prisoners with professional courtesy that bordered on friendship. They discussed medical cases, shared stories of their training, and even debated surgical techniques. Helena found herself in a conversation with a young American surgeon from Pennsylvania who was fascinated with her experience with battlefield trauma. "We don't see the volume of casualties you must have handled," he told her with genuine respect. "What techniques did you develop for dealing with massive blood loss in field conditions?" The question wasn't interrogation. It was professional curiosity from one surgeon to another. Interested in ensuring that medical personnel were properly identified and classified. An older American colonel, himself a physician, explained through an interpreter that the Geneva Convention provided special protections for medical personnel. "You won't be forced to perform non-medical labor," he told the assembled German doctors and nurses. "Your professional status will be respected. You'll be paid according to your rank if you volunteer for medical work." Helena was eventually assigned to a prisoner of war camp in central Texas, a place called Camp Bradford near the town of Abilene. The train journey across America provided views of a country untouched by war. Cities with lights blazing, farmland lush and productive, factories running at full capacity. The contrast with bombed-out European cities was staggering. She pressed her face to the window, trying to reconcile what she saw with the propaganda images of a weak, decadent America on the verge of collapse. Nothing about this prosperous, powerful nation suggested weakness. Camp Bradford, when she arrived in late summer of 1943, exceeded her expectations for a prison facility. The camp sprawled across several hundred acres, with neat rows of barracks, administrative buildings, and a substantial medical complex that included an infirmary and a small hospital. Helena was assigned to work in the hospital, where she would treat both prisoners and, occasionally, American military personnel from nearby training facilities. The medical director, Major Robert Chen, was a second-generation Chinese-American physician from San Francisco who spoke fluent German and seemed genuinely pleased to have experienced medical personnel joining his staff. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Major Chen gave Helena a tour of the medical facility that first day, and what she saw astonished her. The hospital had 20 beds, a surgical suite with modern equipment, an X-ray machine that actually worked, and a pharmacy stocked with supplies that made her breath catch. Shelves lined with medications, bandages, surgical instruments sterilized and ready for use, antiseptics in abundance. "This is more than most field hospitals in Germany ever had," she murmured in German, not realizing Chen would understand. He smiled sadly. "War is terrible enough without denying the wounded proper care," he replied in her language. "Here, we believe that medical ethics transcend national boundaries. You're a physician, Dr. Richter. That matters more than which uniform you wore." The pharmacy's abundance became even more significant several weeks into Helena's assignment when she encountered penicillin for the first time. A young German prisoner, barely 19 years old, had been admitted with a severe leg infection from a wound sustained during his capture. The infection had spread despite sulfa drugs, and Helena recognized the signs of advancing septicemia. In a German military hospital with limited antibiotics, this young man would have faced amputation at best, death at worst. She prepared herself to deliver the devastating news. Major Chen examined the patient alongside her, reviewed the chart, and nodded thoughtfully. "We'll start him on penicillin immediately," he said, calmly, as if suggesting the most routine treatment in the world. Helena stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. Penicillin was legendary among German medical personnel, a miracle drug that the Allies possessed but that remained unavailable to German medicine. Rumors about its effectiveness had circulated among doctors, stories that seemed too good to be true about infections clearing up in days, wounds healing that would have otherwise killed. "Penicillin?" Helena repeated, her voice uncertain. "For a prisoner?" Chen looked at her with an expression that mixed surprise and something like sadness. "Dr. Richter, did you think we would withhold effective treatment because of nationality? He's a patient. He needs penicillin. We have penicillin. The decision is straightforward." That moment crystallized something profound for Helena. The Americans weren't just paying lip service to medical ethics or Geneva Convention requirements. They genuinely treated enemy prisoners as human beings, deserving the same medical care as their own soldiers. Over the following days, she watched in amazement as the young prisoner's infection cleared, his fever broke, and healthy tissue began replacing gangrenous flesh. It was the first of many times she would witness penicillin's miraculous effectiveness. The Americans' willingness to share penicillin with enemy prisoners revealed a depth of humanitarian commitment that challenged Helena's understanding of warfare. In the German military medical system, scarce resources went to those most valuable to the war effort. Wounded soldiers who could return to combat received priority treatment. Those with severe injuries or poor prognosis often received minimal care, their resources redirected to more promising cases. The idea of giving expensive, rare medication to enemy prisoners would have been considered wasteful, even treasonous. But here, in this camp in Texas, American medical personnel operated under different principles. Helena observed Major Chen and his staff treating a German prisoner with pneumonia, administering penicillin doses that would have been hoarded like gold in German facilities. She watched American nurses caring for wounded prisoners with the same attentiveness they showed to American patients. She saw young American doctors consulting with her and other German medical prisoners about cases, genuinely interested in their opinions and experience. The hospital became Helena's world, a peculiar bubble where warfare's hatreds seemed suspended by professional camaraderie. She worked alongside American nurses, who initially had been wary of her but gradually accepted her as a colleague. One nurse, Sarah Martinez from New Mexico, became something approaching a friend. Sarah had lost a brother at Normandy, yet she treated German patients with compassion and competence. "I can hate what the Nazis did," Sarah explained once during a late shift, "but these boys in the beds, they're just wounded soldiers who need care. That's what nursing's about." The pharmaceutical abundance that Helena witnessed went beyond penicillin. The camp hospital had adequate supplies of morphine for pain management, sulfur drugs for routine infections, medications for managing chronic conditions. German prisoners with diabetes received insulin regularly. Those with heart conditions received digitalis. Epileptic prisoners received phenobarbital to control seizures. This comprehensive pharmaceutical care demonstrated an approach to medicine that prioritized patient welfare regardless of cost or nationality. Helena learned that penicillin production in America had been scaled up dramatically since its discovery. What had been an experimental treatment in the early war years had become, by 1943, available in quantities sufficient not only for American military use, but for prisoner medical care as well. The Americans had achieved in pharmaceutical production what German industry, hampered by bombing, resource shortages, and divided priorities, could never accomplish. This industrial capacity to produce life-saving medication in abundance revealed a dimension of American power that went beyond tanks and aircraft. The medical staff meetings at Camp Bradford provided another revelation. Major Chen held weekly conferences where medical personnel, American and German alike, discussed difficult cases, reviewed treatment outcomes, and shared knowledge. Helena found herself presenting cases to an audience that included her former enemies, receiving feedback and suggestions without regard to national origin. An American surgeon suggested a modified technique for treating compound fractures that Helena found elegant and effective. A German orthopedist shared methods for managing battlefield amputations that American doctors incorporated into their practice. These professional exchanges occurred despite the ongoing war, despite the fact that German and American forces were still killing each other on battlefields in Europe and the Pacific. Yet in this hospital, in Texas, medical professionals shared knowledge for the common goal of healing. Helena began to understand that medicine, practiced with integrity, created bonds that transcended political divisions. The Hippocratic Oath, which she had taken years earlier in Munich, meant something profound here, that it had been unable to mean in the ideologically poisoned atmosphere of Nazi Germany. The turning point in Helena's understanding came several months into her captivity, when a badly wounded American soldier was brought to the camp hospital from a nearby training accident. Multiple fractures, internal injuries, and a penetrating wound to the abdomen that became infected despite initial treatment. The young man, a corporal from Iowa named James Peterson, developed sepsis that wasn't responding to sulfa drugs. Major Chen assembled his best surgical team, which included Helena because of her extensive experience with battlefield trauma. The surgery lasted 6 hours, with Helena assisting Chen in repairing damaged organs and debriding infected tissue. When they finished, Peterson was stable but critically ill, the infection still raging through his system. Chen ordered massive doses of penicillin, but the young corporal's condition remained precarious. Helena stayed by his bedside through the night, monitoring vital signs, adjusting medications, doing everything possible to save a life. At some point during that long night, she realized she had stopped thinking of Peterson as an enemy soldier and saw him only as a young man whose life hung in the balance. Peterson survived, eventually recovering fully and returning to duty. His mother wrote a letter to Major Chen thanking the medical staff, and Chen made sure Helena received a copy. "You helped save my son," Mrs. Peterson had written. "I will forever be grateful to everyone who cared for him." Helena kept that letter, a tangible reminder that medicine could bridge even the divide of war. The experience of treating Peterson crystallized Helena's transformation. She had entered American captivity expecting punishment, suspicion, perhaps casual cruelty. Instead, she found professional respect, access to resources she had never known even in peacetime, and colleagues who judged her by her skills and dedication rather than her nationality. The Americans' decision to share penicillin with enemy prisoners revealed a society with resources so abundant and values so deeply held that even enemies deserved the best possible care. As autumn gave way to winter in Texas, Helena settled into a routine that felt almost normal. Morning rounds with the medical staff, treating patients throughout the day, evening discussions with fellow German medical prisoners about cases and techniques. The camp hospital maintained standards that exceeded anything she had known in the German military medical system. Comprehensive patient records, regular equipment maintenance, systematic protocols for everything from wound care to medication administration. American military medicine operated with an efficiency and thoroughness that came from abundant resources and a cultural emphasis on systems and procedures. The other German medical prisoners shared Helena's astonishment at their treatment. Dr. Friedrich Baumann, a psychiatrist from Berlin, marveled at American approaches to combat fatigue. "They treat psychological wounds as legitimate medical conditions," he told Helena over dinner one evening. In German military medicine, combat fatigue was considered cowardice. Here, they have entire treatment protocols, therapy programs, medications. It's a completely different philosophy. Dr. Baumann had been allowed to work with American psychiatrists treating prisoners with mental health issues, an opportunity that exposed him to therapeutic approaches that German military psychiatry had rejected. The camp library provided another avenue for professional development. Donated books and current medical journals gave Helena access to medical literature she hadn't seen in years. American medical journals, British publications that have been banned in Germany, research papers on advances in surgery, anesthesia, and pharmaceutical development. She spent her limited free time reading voraciously, trying to catch up on years of medical progress that Nazi censorship and wartime isolation had hidden from German physicians. Helena discovered articles about penicillin's development, the massive effort to produce it in quantity, and clinical trials demonstrating its effectiveness against bacterial infections. She read about other medical advances, improved blood transfusion techniques, new approaches to treating shock, developments in anesthesia that made surgery safer. The breadth of medical progress occurring in Allied nations while Germany had been cut off from international medical science was staggering. She realized that German medicine, even before the war's destruction, had been falling behind because Nazi ideology had rejected scientific contributions from non-Aryan researchers. The winter of 1943 brought unexpected challenges that would further demonstrate the depth of American commitment to medical ethics. A severe influenza outbreak swept through Camp Bradford, affecting both prisoners and American personnel. The scale of the epidemic required mobilization of all medical resources, and Helena found herself working 20-hour shifts alongside American doctors and nurses in a desperate effort to save lives. The outbreak tested everything she had learned about American medicine and revealed new dimensions of professional collaboration. Major Chen organized the epidemic response with military precision, establishing isolation wards, implementing infection control protocols, and coordinating treatment efforts. Helena was assigned to lead one of the medical teams, a responsibility that surprised her. "You have more experience managing mass casualties than anyone else here," Chen explained when she questioned the assignment. "I need your expertise, Dr. Richter. Lives depend on it." The trust implicit in that assignment, giving an enemy prisoner responsibility for American lives during a medical crisis, moved Helena deeply. The influenza epidemic hit the youngest and healthiest hardest, turning vigorous young men into desperately ill patients within days. High fevers, severe respiratory distress, secondary bacterial pneumonia that could kill within hours. Helena worked through exhaustion, moving from bed to bed, making rapid assessments, ordering treatments, holding the hands of dying boys who called for their mothers in German and English alike. The disease made no distinction between German prisoners and American guards, between captor and captive. In the isolation wards, nationality ceased to matter. There were only the sick and those trying to save them. Penicillin became crucial in fighting the secondary bacterial infections that killed most influenza victims. Major Chen authorized unlimited use of the antibiotic for both American and German patients, a decision that Helena knew represented significant expense and resource allocation. She watched as vials of the precious medication were administered without hesitation to German prisoners whose lives hung in the balance. Young men who would have died in German military hospitals survived because American medicine refused to distinguish between worthy and unworthy patients. One case particularly affected Helena. A German prisoner named Klaus Werner, barely 21 years old, developed severe pneumonia following influenza. His lungs filled with fluid, his oxygen levels dropped dangerously low, and Helena recognized the pattern of rapid decline that usually ended in death. She started him on aggressive penicillin therapy, ordered oxygen supplementation, and stayed at his bedside through the critical hours. Klaus was a farm boy from Bavaria who had been drafted at 18 and captured during his first major engagement. He had never wanted to be a soldier, had never embraced Nazi ideology, had simply been swept up in history's terrible currents. Through that long night, as Helena fought to keep Klaus alive, she thought about all the young men she had watched die in German field hospitals because adequate medication wasn't available. She thought about the choices she had been forced to make, deciding who would receive the limited antibiotics and who would be left to fate. Those impossible decisions had haunted her, corroding something essential in her soul. But here, in this American facility, no such choices were necessary. Every patient received the treatment they needed. Resources were allocated based on medical necessity, not on calculations of military value or racial hierarchy. Klaus survived. When he regained consciousness 2 days later, weak but clearly recovering, his first words were a whispered question. "Why did you save me? I'm just a prisoner." Helena looked at this young man whose life she had fought so hard to preserve and found herself unable to articulate the profound shift that had occurred in her understanding of medicine. "Because you're a patient," she finally said, "because saving lives is what we do." The epidemic lasted 3 weeks and claimed 12 lives, 8 German prisoners and 4 American personnel. Major Chen held a memorial service that honored all the dead equally, reading their names without distinction of nationality. Helena stood among the mourners, American and German together, and felt the weight of shared grief. The young American chaplain who conducted the service spoke about the universal tragedy of young lives cut short, about the hope that someday humanity would find better ways to resolve conflicts than through war. His words resonated with Helena's growing conviction that the professional respect she had experienced in American captivity represented something profoundly important about human potential. After the epidemic, Helena's relationship with the American medical staff deepened into genuine collegiality. Sarah Martinez, the nurse who had lost a brother in combat, invited Helena to join a study group of medical personnel reviewing recent advances in trauma care. The group included 3 American nurses, 2 American doctors, and 2 German medical prisoners. They met weekly, discussing journal articles, debating treatment approaches, and sharing experiences. The conversations ranged widely, touching on everything from surgical techniques to medical ethics, to the proper role of physicians in society. During one particularly intense discussion, an American doctor named Robert Harrison challenged the group to consider how medical professionals should respond when their governments pursue immoral policies. "We took an oath to do no harm," Harrison argued. "But what does that mean when the society we serve commits atrocities?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Helena knew he was referring to Nazi Germany's crimes, the rumors of death camps and systematic murder that even she, isolated in military medicine, had heard whispers about. She chose her words carefully, aware that what she said might be reported, might have consequences she couldn't foresee. "I took my oath seriously," she said quietly. "I tried to heal everyone who came to me, regardless of who they were. But I was part of a system that committed terrible wrongs. I didn't participate directly in atrocities, but my work supported an evil regime. I have to live with that knowledge. All I can do now is try to practice medicine with integrity, to honor my oath in every action going forward." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Sarah spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "We all make choices about how to live with moral complexity. What matters is learning, growing, and doing better. You're doing that, Helena." The use of her first name, the implicit acceptance of her as a colleague and friend, despite everything that stood between them, brought unexpected tears to Helena's eyes. These Americans, who had every reason to hate her and her countrymen, had chosen instead to see her as a fellow human being struggling to live ethically in an unethical world. The spring of 1944 brought new prisoners to Camp Bradford as Allied advances in Europe generated more captives. Among them were several German nurses who had been captured in Italy. Helena helped orient these newcomers to camp life, watching them experience the same astonishment she had felt months earlier. One young nurse, Margaret Schneider from Hamburg, broke down crying when she saw the pharmacy's stocked shelves. "We ran out of everything months ago," she sobbed. "I watched men die because we didn't have bandages, didn't have morphine for their pain. And here, you have everything." Helena understood Marguerite's tears. The contrast between the desperate scarcity of German military medicine and the abundance of American facilities represented more than just different resource levels. It revealed fundamental differences in values, in how societies allocated resources and defined priorities. America, even while fighting a global war on multiple fronts, maintained medical standards that prioritized healing over mere military efficiency. That commitment required resources, certainly, but it also required a cultural value system that saw human life as worth preserving regardless of nationality or military utility. The new arrivals also brought updated news from Europe, and what Helena heard chilled her. Germany was collapsing, its cities bombed to rubble, its armies in retreat, its civilian population suffering terribly. The Nazi regime, facing inevitable defeat, was becoming more brutal and desperate. Marguerite spoke of summary executions for defeatism, of fanatics forcing children into military service, of a leadership so disconnected from reality that they still spoke of ultimate victory even as their nation burned around them. Helena thought of her family in Munich, wondered if they had survived the bombing, whether she would ever see them again. Major Chen noticed Helena's distress and invited her to his office for tea, a gesture of kindness that helped her process the disturbing news. "Your family?" he asked gently. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "War spares no one," Chen said quietly. "All we can do is honor life by preserving it wherever we can. Your work here, Dr. Richter, saves lives. That matters, regardless of what's happening elsewhere." His words provided comfort, but they also crystallized Helena's determination to make her captivity meaningful. She threw herself into medical work with renewed intensity, volunteering for additional shifts, tutoring younger German medical prisoners in surgical techniques, collaborating with American personnel on improving treatment protocols. The camp hospital became her refuge, a place where the war's chaos could be countered with order, competence, and care. One of her most significant contributions during this period involved developing improved protocols for treating battlefield trauma based on her extensive field experience. Major Chen asked her to document the techniques she had developed for managing wounds under resource-constrained conditions. Helena wrote detailed reports on improvised surgical methods, triage systems for mass casualties, and psychological approaches for maintaining medical staff morale under extreme stress. These reports, she later learned, were shared with American military medical units and influenced their practices. The collaboration went both ways. American doctors shared with Helena their advances in anesthesia, particularly the use of new agents that made surgery safer and allowed for more complex procedures. She learned about blood banking systems that ensured adequate supply for transfusions, about mobile surgical hospitals that brought advanced care close to front lines, about systematic approaches to evacuating wounded from battlefield to hospital. The American military medical system operated with an organizational sophistication that impressed Helena deeply. Summer brought intense Texas heat and a new challenge for the camp hospital. A work detail of German prisoners suffered multiple casualties when their truck overturned on a rural road. 8 men were brought to the hospital with injuries ranging from minor cuts to critical internal trauma. Helena was part of the surgical team that worked through the night, operating on the most seriously injured, stabilizing them, fighting to save lives. 2 men required particularly complex surgery, and Major Chen assigned Helena to lead one operation while he handled the other. The surgery Helena performed that night represented the culmination of everything she had learned in American captivity. She had access to excellent equipment, adequate anesthesia, skilled assistance, unlimited supplies, and the knowledge that if her patient needed penicillin or any other medication, it would be available without question. She worked with confidence born of knowing that she could practice medicine the way it should be practiced, without the compromises and impossible choices that had defined her work in German military hospitals. Her patients survived, as did Major Chen's. All 8 prisoners eventually recovered, a success rate that would have been impossible under German military medical conditions. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Helena had spent years believing that German medicine was superior, that German medical training and practice represented the pinnacle of the profession. Her experience in American captivity had shattered that belief. American medicine, supported by abundant resources and guided by ethical principles that transcended nationality, achieved results that German medicine, hampered by scarcity and poisoned by ideology, could never match. The philosophical implications troubled Helena during quiet moments. If German medicine wasn't superior, what else about German claims of superiority might be false? She had been raised in a culture that taught German supremacy, that insisted German science, culture, and civilization stood above all others. Yet here she was, a prisoner in enemy hands, experiencing professional respect and access to resources that exceeded anything she had known in her homeland. The cognitive dissonance was profound and disturbing. She discussed these troubling thoughts with Dr. Baumann, the psychiatrist, during long evening walks around the camp perimeter. Baumann, older and more politically astute, had reached similar conclusions. The Nazi ideology was built on lies, he told her bluntly. They told us we were superior, but they starved our medical system of resources. They promised prosperity, but they destroyed our economy through war. They claimed to protect German people, but they brought devastation upon us. Everything we were taught was propaganda. These conversations were dangerous. Even in American captivity, Nazi loyalists existed among the prisoners, men who might report such defeatist talk. But Helena found that speaking honestly about her disillusionment helped her process the collapse of her worldview. She was experiencing what psychologists would later call cognitive restructuring, the painful process of rebuilding one's understanding of reality when foundational beliefs prove false. The autumn of 1944 brought news of Allied victories in Europe and the Pacific. Germany's defeat seemed inevitable now, and among the prisoners, attitudes divided sharply. Some remained committed Nazis who insisted that secret weapons would turn the tide. Others, like Helena, quietly accepted that Germany had lost and began thinking about what would come after. The camp administration monitored these divisions carefully, separating hardcore Nazis from other prisoners to prevent violence. Helena was moved to a section of the camp designated for prisoners who had demonstrated trustworthiness and cooperation. The conditions here were even better, with more freedom of movement, better accommodations, and increased opportunities for education and recreation. She shared a small room with Margarete, the nurse from Hamburg, and they became close friends. Margarete had family in the Eastern Territories, and she worried constantly about what would happen when Soviet forces occupied those areas. Helena had no answers, no comfort to offer except friendship and shared anxiety about an uncertain future. Christmas 1944 at Camp Bradford revealed another dimension of American values. The camp administration organized celebrations that included religious services, special meals, and entertainment. German prisoners were allowed to conduct their own Christmas Eve services, singing carols in German, observing traditions from home. American guards attended some of these services, standing respectfully at the back of the chapel. Major Chen arranged for the hospital staff, American and German, to enjoy a special holiday dinner with gifts and fun activities. Share a Christmas dinner together, a gesture of professional solidarity that moved Helena deeply. During that dinner, Major Chen gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their dedication during a difficult year. He acknowledged the strangeness of enemies sharing a holiday meal, but insisted that their common commitment to healing transcended national boundaries. "We are medical professionals first," he said. "That identity matters more than the uniforms we wear or the flags we serve. When this war ends, and it will end soon, we will all return to the work of healing our broken world. Tonight, we celebrate our shared humanity and our shared calling." Helena raised her glass along with everyone else, toasting to peace and healing. She looked around the table at American and German faces, at people who, months earlier, would have been trying to kill each other, but who now shared professional bonds and genuine friendships. The moment felt significant, a glimpse of what post-war reconciliation might look like if people of goodwill chose cooperation over continued hatred. As 1945 began, Helena faced the reality that the war would soon end, and she would face repatriation to whatever remained of Germany. The prospect filled her with anxiety. What would she find there? Would her family have survived? What kind of medical system would exist in a defeated Germany? Would she be able to practice medicine, or would the post-war chaos make professional work impossible? These questions haunted her, but she tried to focus on the present, on the work she could do here and now. Major Chen, sensing her anxiety, called her into his office one January morning. "Dr. Richter, I want you to know that you've been an exemplary colleague," he told her. "Your skill, dedication, and integrity have earned everyone's respect. When you return to Germany, you'll face difficult conditions, but I'm confident you'll make important contributions to rebuilding German medicine. I'm writing a letter of recommendation for you, documenting your work here. It might help in the future." Helena was speechless. That an American officer would provide a professional recommendation for an enemy prisoner seemed almost unbelievable. Yet it was entirely consistent with everything she had experienced. The Americans had treated her as a colleague throughout her captivity, so why wouldn't they support her professional future? "Thank you, Major Chen," she managed to say. "Working with you and learning from you has changed my understanding of medicine and ethics. I'll carry those lessons with me always." The final months of Helena's captivity passed in a blur of continued medical work and preparations for an uncertain future. Germany's surrender in May 1945 brought the war in Europe to an end, but it also brought horrifying revelations about the full extent of Nazi atrocities. The death camps, the systematic murder of millions, the industrial-scale evil that had been perpetrated in Germany's name. Helena and the other prisoners watched newsreels of liberated camps, saw images of skeletal survivors and mountains of corpses, and confronted the monstrous reality of the regime they had served. The psychological impact was devastating. Helena had known that the Nazi government was brutal and racist, but the death camps exceeded anything she had imagined. She thought about her medical oath, about the principle of doing no harm, and realized how completely that principle had been violated by German medicine's participation in genocide. She had not participated directly in those crimes, but she had been part of the medical profession that had. That knowledge would haunt her forever. Dr. Baumann, the psychiatrist, helped her and other prisoners process these revelations in informal group sessions. "We have to face what was done in our names," he insisted. "We have to acknowledge the evil, accept our share of responsibility for not opposing it more effectively, and commit ourselves to ensuring nothing like this ever happens again. That's the only path forward. Helena's repatriation came in the summer of 1945. She was part of a large group of prisoners being returned to occupied Germany, now divided into zones controlled by different Allied powers. The journey back across the Atlas Ocean was on a troop ship, crammed with other prisoners.
The Atlantic voyage was somber, the prisoners uncertain about what they would find in their devastated homeland. Helena carried with her Major Chen's letter of recommendation, several American medical journals he had given her, and memories of treatment that had challenged everything she thought she knew about enemies and allies. The Germany she returned to was unrecognizable. Munich, her hometown, had been bombed extensively. The beautiful city of her youth was now rubble-strewn ruins. Her family's apartment building was gone, destroyed in one of the many air raids. Through Red Cross channels, she eventually learned that her parents had survived and were living with relatives in a rural area west of the city. The reunion was emotional and difficult, marked by relief at survival, but also by the chasm between her experiences and theirs. Helena found work in a makeshift hospital operating in a partially destroyed school building. The conditions were primitive, supplies scarce, the work overwhelming. Tens of thousands of displaced people, former prisoners, concentration camp survivors, returning soldiers, all needed medical care. Disease was rampant, malnutrition widespread, the medical infrastructure shattered. Helena worked 18-hour days in conditions that made her North African field hospital seem well-equipped by comparison. But she brought with her knowledge gained in American captivity. She organized the chaotic hospital using principles she had learned at Camp Bradford, implementing systematic patient record-keeping, establishing protocols for infection control, creating triage systems for allocating scarce resources fairly. Her experience with American military medicine gave her organizational tools that helped bring order to chaos. More importantly, she insisted on ethical treatment for all patients, refusing to distinguish between Germans and displaced persons, between former Nazis and their victims, between those who seemed worthy of care and those who did not. Other German medical personnel who had experienced American captivity were making similar contributions across occupied Germany. Dr. Baumann was working in Hamburg, establishing mental health services for traumatized populations. Margaret was nursing in Berlin, bringing American standards of patient care to desperate conditions. Slowly, German medicine was being rebuilt, and those who had seen how American medicine operated at its best were helping shape that reconstruction. They brought with them not just techniques and organizational methods, but ethical principles that insisted on human dignity regardless of nationality or past actions. Helena eventually reconnected with Major Chen through letters. He had returned to San Francisco and was working at a veterans hospital, treating American soldiers returning from the Pacific. His letters offered encouragement and advice as Helena navigated post-war Germany's challenges. "You're doing exactly what you should be doing," he wrote in one letter. "Medicine's highest calling is to bring healing to broken places. Germany is broken now, but it will rebuild. The question is what kind of medicine, what kind of society will emerge from the ruins? Your work, your commitment to ethical practice helps ensure that the new Germany will be better than the old." Those words sustained Helena through years of difficult work in devastated Germany. She never forgot the lessons learned during her captivity, never forgot that American medical personnel had chosen to treat her as a colleague rather than an enemy, that they had shared their most precious medical resources with prisoners who had no claim on American generosity beyond common humanity.
Professional respect, the abundance of resources allocated to prisoner medical care, the penicillin given without hesitation to save enemy lives. Medicine, she would tell her students, must stand above politics and ideology. A patient is a patient, regardless of nationality or circumstances. That principle, which I learned from my captors during the war, must guide your practice always. The story of Helena Richter and thousands of other German medical personnel who experienced American treatment during the war demonstrates that professional ethics and humanitarian decency can survive even the most bitter conflicts. The American decision to share penicillin and other scarce medical resources with enemy prisoners reflected values that transcended military necessity. It showed that a society could remain committed to humanitarian principles even while fighting a total war against an evil ideology. Those German medical professionals who experienced this treatment carried its lessons back to their destroyed homeland and helped build a new German medicine grounded in respect for human dignity and ethical practice. Their legacy reminds us that how we treat our enemies reveals who we are and shapes what the world becomes after conflict ends. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.